William, good morning. How are you? Is it good morning or good afternoon?
It is good morning indeed, sir.
It's still good morning. How are you?
Is it a good morning? No, I'm very well. I'm very well.
Actually,
I'm very well.
That's an interesting question, right? How are you has taken on a whole new meaning, I think, in the last few months. I'm not sure we even want to go there. Welcome to our second version of lockdown sessions. And today I'm really pleased because I've got my 17-year-old cat sitting on the desk with me, so he might make an appearance at some point.
17 years. What a fantastic age.
He's named after Sonny Corleone from The Godfather. He's very handsome, very butch, and has a black body with a white necktie. So it just reminded me of Sonny Corleone, James Caan's character.
Absolutely.
In The Godfather. And he is a really sweet cat. So he might start to get up and start purring and licking and moving around.
That's okay. Very sweet cat, unlike the character played by James Caan of Sonny Corleone,
who was tough as boots.
Indeed, he was.
He knows we're talking about him. So look, welcome to lockdown again. And when we met last time, we kind of moved around between the change curve and almost how do people come back into work. And I'm thinking now, and we were just chatting before, I'm thinking as a coach, life's going to look quite different. I think coaching is going to become even more relevant to businesses, to leaders particularly. And I was wondering, as a coach, with your discussions with leaders at the moment, what are the topics that are coming up? Is it business as usual? Are they worried about their teams? I know some of the guys you're working with, so they'll be working remotely. They won't be seeing customers. What are you noticing?
I mean, if I think about it, it's almost as if there's kind of two phases to this. There's the kind of phase one, which was the sort of COVID, living through the COVID. And then there's the phase two, which is now kind of people considering and transitioning back into more office life. Although I think with the caveat that most of the leaders I'm talking to are aware and don't want it to go back to the same as it was in terms of the new normal. I think people are looking much more now to blend. And obviously you've got to take a whole shed load of safety measures into account to ensure that people understandably are safe during this time. So you've got to set your office up correctly. In terms of worried about their team, I think within the context of uncertainty, not for all of the people I'm working with, but certainly in some industries, things are very uncertain. So they're worried about the livelihood of their people and themselves, for that matter, to some degree. That doesn't apply to everybody. I think if you're in a growth sector whereby you're acquiring or you're relatively kind of in demand with what you do, I think you're relatively safe. I do think it's interesting though, because I mean, if I think about my own experience, I've actually got used to this existence of working from this space in home. So now there's a case of how do you kind of re-engage your people now that things are changing and kind of moving on, and people are looking at some kind of version of normality. So I'd say those are the kind of things which are going on for me in terms of speaking with the people who I'm coaching with and who are leading teams. There's a kind of phase two. There's a kind of phase two in the offing.
Yeah, and when I'm listening to you, what really speaks to me is that engagement. How do we as coaches engage back to being in office? Because the environments that we work in office are normally small rooms. 12 to 15 people crammed in round a boardroom-like table shape. And you can't socially distance. You definitely aren't 2 meters away from people. And my feeling is that that style of development is not going to happen unless people have got huge offices and run trainings for like 6 people.
Yes, I think that's true. I think I'm also just taking that idea. I mean, one client whom I'm working with, and this probably applies to a lot of clients actually, is they're looking at kind of teams taking it in turns to be in offices.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think what's interesting about that, if I think about it, I mean, this has always been a challenge for any organization and any leader within an organization, which is, I think that one of the key things which is going to come through is how do you prioritize so that you really make the most of that time when you are in the environment that you're in? How do you actually prioritize it so that you still have that social aspect, that connection aspect, and all of that good stuff that people love and value, myself included, whilst at the same time making sure that you're really spending time on the things that you really want to spend time with if you've only got 1 week out of 4 in the office, for example,
Right.
or every other week in the office. I think that whole thing around prioritizing and really getting the focus going and supporting leaders to support their teams to do that through coaching, I think is quite a key thing, and supporting them to do that for themselves as well.
How do you feel about going into offices and working again with people, like real live people, as opposed to the virtual
Yeah.
classroom that we've become so
As opposed to
savvy
this thing
with?
that we've got, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first time we were doing kind of podding, I think you came round to the cabin and we were sat in the cabin with our little microphone in between us. We haven't seen each other for like 5 months.
Exactly. So how do I feel about it? It's interesting because in terms of the office piece, I feel pretty good about that because I think that the clients whom I'm working with have a sufficient awareness and duty of care to their people to put things in place whereby things are safe and secure. So in terms of being in the office, I feel relatively good about that because I think people have taken the measures. People want to do right by their people. They really have invested in health and safety and PPE and all of that stuff. So I feel good about that. I'm looking forward to physically seeing people, although it's interesting because, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as being a hugger, but I do like contact. So I'm going to have to manage myself through that in terms of not having any kind of even minor huggy tendencies, shall we say. But the other thing is actually getting to the offices. So if I'm taking a train, I do have, particularly if I'm working in London with the tube, I mean, if I'm honest, I have considerations about that.
Yeah, I don't even have considerations. I do not want to be getting on the London Underground at the moment. I don't feel that feels safe, and I feel like it exposes my parents or stops me
Yes.
from seeing them because they're at that age where they've been shielding, and I don't want to feel as though I can't see them. I like your point about hugging. Both of my clients I've worked with for years, so it tends to be a hug when I go in, and yeah, that's definitely off for sure. Actually, this week we signed a new contract with a client, a pharma company that explicitly focuses on working with plasmas. So they're actually doing some work with COVID to
Wow.
sort of help with the vaccine element through plasma. And the CEO says to me, so Brad, we want to run these 2 away days for the leadership team to do our planning, but we want to do them on site. And I said, look, I'm happy to explore that, but I just want to share about my father. He says to me, Brad, we're a pharma company, so it's full PPE, it's deep cleanse cleaning. We've got a massive sterile room that we're working in, and everyone will have to wear masks. No tables, in the room, just chairs. Every chair will have the name of the person who sits on it for the 2 day. And I'm like, that feels safe. That feels.
Yeah, that does feel safe. I love that. I love the idea of that person saying to you, Brad, we're a pharma company. Like literally, our motto is safety and PPE. We're working with this stuff all the time.
Right.
I like the idea of the whole chair situation because I'm so used to kind of getting people to mix it up and sit with someone new. You can forget that as well. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Exactly. And there's another part of me as well, and I feel aligned to this. That I think one thing I've noticed over the last few months is how institutionalized we've all become very quickly. People have become used to working from home. I think a number of people I speak to actually, they're all right staying at home. They get work done. They don't have a hideous commute. Yes, they miss people. If they could go into the office 1 day a week to see people and spend 4 days a week at home, I don't think they'd mind.
I don't either. And this links to something which you asked me a moment ago about sort of, what are you finding with the team you're coaching with? I think that's something which people are wrestling with, which is how do you keep some of the good things which has actually come out of this whole experience? Because there are lots of good things to be had from this experience. One of which is how do you create a blend whereby, yes, there is some office work. Also, though, building that level of trust whereby it's completely fine for people to work from home. In fact, it's beneficial because some people, I've noticed, tend to be more productive at home and they get more done. Not everybody does, I imagine, but I do think there's a kind of transition in terms of how does one as a leader create a blend so that you have that mixture of working from home and also working in an office whereby you are showing and displaying and keeping going with the trust aspect so that people feel trusted, empowered, engaged, all of that good stuff, given that things will now be different.
Yeah, and I suppose people have had 3-4 months now where they've proven that they can work from home, they can get things done. They're not sat at home watching Oprah on the TV all day, which I'm sure is what most of my family have thought I've been doing. I for years I used to speak to like my sister or something, and she'd say to me, it's like be a Wednesday night, and she'd be like, "Are you working tomorrow?" And it's like, I'd say to her, I work every day.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. What a great question. By the way, just a quick word to the wise. You're showing your age there in terms of daytime programming.
Right.
Because you really should be talking about Ellen. Ellen's the person who's on daytime programming now. I can't remember the last time I see Oprah doing a show, but Ellen has the afternoon kind of slot. I probably said too much there about myself in terms of podcasting, but transparency and openness, everybody. Transparency and openness.
I like it. So it's Ellen. Right. And I saw Ellen complaining about being a prisoner in her 45-acre Hollywood estate at the beginning of lockdown.
She's so like us, isn't she?
Just woman of the people.
Exactly.
Whereas James Corden, I think, was running his show from his garage. I saw a great episode of Corden doing the Late Show, where it was just after Trump had done his Bible Photoshop.
Oh yeah.
And James Corden's dad used to sell Bibles as his job.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, well I didn't know that either. But on this episode, James Corden actually calls his dad up on Zoom, and they have this chat where his dad teaches President Trump how to hold the Bible. It's a brilliant 3-minute section. I would recommend YouTubing James Corden's dad plus Bible.
I think I'm going to do that after this conversation. That sounds terrific. But yeah, I mean, in answer to your earlier question, I think that there is that whole aspect of kind of just finding that blend and working with people to build the trust that by definition of the conditions that we were in, you had to kind of adopt. how do you kind of continue with that? How do you maintain that? Because you can't. I think it's counterproductive to then kind of go, okay, everybody, it's back to normal. 5 days in the office, see you there, and you can't do that anyway.
No, although I have one client who did insist that their people came back, and I'm not convinced they needed to do that. I think, and this leads maybe onto kind of the next section, which is, and you touched on it, this kind of psychological safety that people need to go back, and I include, myself in that as well.
Yeah.
I want to know that if I'm going into a client, that place is safe. And so there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. My sense is, from a coaching point of view, that coaching itself could probably maintain its virtual state. It doesn't need to move back into the office. But I'm wondering about, training, particularly, we get involved in European-wide or regional-wide programs. And I don't think companies are going to just be flying everybody all over the place to stay in hotels and go to training sessions. So
Neither do I.
The world looks different for us, for sure.
I mean, I'd agree with that. And also, it's interesting if I think about what one client whom I'm working with, which is, I think people like the flexibility of the virtual workshop format. I think people like that because they can sign on to it, sign off, and get back to their normal working day, as opposed to commuting in, having a session, commuting back. I've noticed, in terms of some of the virtual stuff I've been doing compared to face-to-face, there's actually been a bigger take-up with one client I'm working with. And I think that's quite an interesting thing to note in terms of how you continue with that so that people's appetite is still fed, and you're not losing momentum, and giving that to people as an option. So, I mean, I think you're right. And also, look, let's be honest. Everyone's talking about the environment and the planet by running it virtually and not doing the whole flights and hotels thing. To all of my friends who work in the hospitality industry, I know that this is probably not a great thing to say, but it does help that side of things. And I also appreciate that sometimes you would want to do that depending on what the nature of the event is.
Yeah, I think, listen, events have been decimated. My brother runs an events company, and he's had to write off the whole year, because even Christmas parties, if you're only allowed 30 people in a gathering, it's not exactly going to do much for his big events of 200 people.
No.
But I'm interested in what you say there, because I think you're right that actually, for most people, the opportunity to kind of dive into a virtual session for 2 hours is much more attractive than giving up 8 hours in the day where they're distracted by their phone.
Yeah.
And I see it. In fact, yesterday morning, I had a call with a client, a local authority client, and we were all set to do a load of management programs in March. Obviously, they pinged me to say cancelled. And I said, yeah, no problem. And then I pinged them a message a couple of weeks ago to say, hey, listen, I know we're still off, but this is what I've been doing. Do you want to have a chat? We can meet on Zoom. I'll show you what we can do. And we literally had a Zoom call yesterday morning, and they're booking in 3 workshops, 4 hours, 2 hours plus 2 hours later in the day. So people come in at 9:30 till 11:30, come back at 1:30 till 3:30, have their lunch with their kids if they're homeschooling, finished by the time they might need their kids to kind of get them ready for tea or something.
Yeah.
And actually, it was almost instant. She was like, yeah, let's do it. And I think you're right, that take up. And she's saying to me, how many can we have in the room? It's like, well, actually, you can have up to 100.
Yes.
I'm not sure I want to train 100. I don't mind broadcasting to 100, but if you want to do a training session, maybe 20. Yeah. And normally you'd have 12.
Yeah.
So we can touch more people.
Yeah.
appropriately, obviously. That's
Yeah,
not
well
right or
done for
wrong.
clarifying that. That's a very funny. It reminds you of School of Rock, but anyway.
Yeah.
But what I do think is interesting about what you're saying there, though, which is there is a difference between having something which is interactive and the numbers. I mean, some people say it's 6 to 8, some people say it's 20, some people say it's somewhere in the middle. But I think there's a difference between broadcasting and workshopping stroke training.
Mm.
And I think that, if you got that many people, then it is well, not all of it, but a lot of it will be broadcasting. You can still do some small bits, but most of it's broadcast if it's like sort of 3 figures people.
Yeah, for sure. Right. So we did a mindfulness session for 180 people at a client last month, and it was just pure broadcast. Yes, there was chat going on. People were making comments, and I can see it, and I can reflect on it and announce it. But essentially, it was broadcast. There was no feedback. I think once it gets beyond 20, it's hard to engage because you can spend half an hour just getting the feedback from everybody, and that just means there's no learning then.
Exactly. So I think there's that there is that to kind of consider and take into account. But like you, I am not envisaging it going back to what it was. I actually think that's quite a good thing. I do think there's a process and a journey for a lot of people to kind of recalibrate. Certainly, I think about one client, they had a lot of reticence about doing coaching virtually. I mean, some people don't, because geographically, if you're coaching, you're not going to do a 90-minute session with somebody in India face to face. That's just, absolutely ridiculous in terms of completely unrealistic for travel, expenses, cost, time, whatever you want to say. But I do think that some people will kind of go, actually, I could get the same effect, results, and what I need from doing it virtually. There is a bit of a recalibration. It's a bit like sort of people doing Zoom classes, fitness classes, or yoga. People have had to kind of adjust to that, and but once you do, then you kind of go, actually, I'm getting as much as I did if it was face to face as I am with this. But there is a journey to be had.
Coaching is set up for it, no doubt.
Yeah,
if I go
absolutely.
back 10 years, I remember that I would get a Eurostar over to Paris at sort of 7 in the morning, get into Paris for 10, have a 2-hour coaching session across the road from Gare du Nord, and be on a 2 o'clock train back to Harpenden for 4:30. And it'd be like, I left home at 6:30, I got home at 4, and I went to Paris for lunch. And actually it felt quite good fun at the time, because it's just a 2-hour journey.
Sure.
I remember one time flying into Munich to do a coaching session in a hotel next to Munich airport, and flew back later that day. Good old Lufthansa. But you're right, because of the way we're so digitally connected, I think we're set for it. I'm interested a little bit from a coaching style point of view. When you're coaching now, do you have a different perspective yourself as a coach because of what's happened?
Give me a bit more on what you mean by perspective.
So I'm thinking that, for the first time ever in the world, every single person on the planet is going through something similar.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first time, we all actually genuinely have empathy for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that somehow manifests itself into changing your coaching approach or your coaching style.
I don't know whether it's changed my coaching style. I think I would say that I've noticed that there's more human checking in moments that seem to happen. I would say that those seem to happen with more regularity, because you're right. I think that because this is something which everyone is kind of in together. There's a kind of a mutual experience that seems to be coming through, and so there tends to be more human aspects to it. I tell you what I do find interesting about this virtual piece, which is, for some reason, and a lot of this is just in my head, but when I'm doing this face to face, it's funny, the silences it's not bad. It just feels different compared to if I was sitting across a table from somebody.
I'm trying to stay silent to to recreate it for you.
Right there. So, I mean, look, it's not bad. It doesn't make me feel uncomfortable or bad, but I have just noticed that that seems to feel different.
Yeah, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah. I don't know whether my coaches feel like there's more urgency for them to respond or kind of come up with something when I ask a question.
Yeah.
But I have noticed a little bit of that, not majorly, but in answer to your question in terms of the approach or style, I guess that's something which I would say could be a different thing I've noticed. But I do think that there's more of a human check-in experience given this universal thing that we're all in. So there we go, really. Yeah. So I have noticed that.
I found that sessions actually, because normally I would run a 90-minute session. And I find a number of the virtual sessions have kind of moved to 60 minutes. So I hear you about the human check-in, and I think that's just appropriate. But it seems as though, yeah, there's a kind of almost a more efficient route to getting to resolution on things. Because maybe we know we're about to get onto another call, or I don't know, there is something in that.
I think there's something in that. I think that's right. I was just thinking about that human bit and what I mean by that. I guess here's the thing with the virtual stuff, which is you get to see an aspect of each other's lives that you wouldn't normally see. So, for example, you see someone's partner walking past with, their lunch, or you see, in your case, like you see your James Caan cat. Or you see behind me my sort of porthole mirror, or you just see things which kind of you wouldn't get to see if you're in a normal office environment. And that kind of sparks some degree of interest and curiosity. I was actually I did a session a little while back. I've got a sort of an upstairs space, an office. And I've decided to move down here because it's less distracting, because behind me are all the various things I've collected over the years on my travels when I've been working overseas. So the person talking went, "Where are you? Are you in a shop?" And it's like, no, I'm not in a shop. But, this is just kind of my life behind me. But I think I think the reason why it feels more human perhaps is you get to see aspects of somebody's life, like even the kids, like, quite often you can hear a child or see a child in the background. It's different.
Well, no, and I think there's a level of intimacy that creates that perhaps enables us to acknowledge that it is okay to work like this.
Yes.
And my sense is that those companies that are forward thinking are going to acknowledge and recognize that they're going to go to their people and say, do you want to come back in? Now, I know some jobs you just can't do it if you're not in the office.
Yeah.
People who work on certain platforms, people in packaging or warehousing, you can't pick products.
Absolutely. You can't distribute virtually.
Right.
You have to distribute physically.
Correct. But most other jobs, especially operationally, can be.
Yeah.
I think the sales guys I've coached have struggled the most, the ones who are not on the road. They are totally devoid of seeing their customer base.
Yes.
Their pipelines come in now, so business development is pretty ropey. And their products are about seeing and touching and feeling, and actually they can't get out and talk to people. And they seem to be struggling. And I've noticed from a coaching point of view that seems to be something that they want to talk about. How do we get back to selling our business to clients when we can't travel to see them? And they are real quandary questions that I was sat the other day with someone, and literally for 20 minutes we're batting ideas around and still didn't come up with anything that vaguely felt as though it was something that inspired him.
Yeah.
And he was down about it. He said 4 months without seeing my customers. He lives on his own. He is successful by number, but he hasn't been out his apartment really for the last 4 months.
It's very. I mean, look, hey, that's a different existence. I mean, it's interesting because also just thinking about that, I wonder how much of that. Just thinking about various sales models that we've encountered over the years, but I was just thinking about the whole challenger sale, relationship builder plus aspect of this, because I think one of the reasons that people like to go and see customers, myself included, is purely because of relationship and connecting with the person. I think if you look at Relationship Builder Plus, also looking at Challenger, there are some different angles on there around, what's your unique offering. So, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that it's bloody hard, because that's what people are used to, and that's what customers want, as well as the person who's providing and selling the services as well. It's a tricky thing.
And from a new business perspective, I think for existing businesses where the relationship is there, the
Yes.
virtual world is fine,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I've been connecting with virtually with our customer base here for the last 4 months without any problem. Sometimes
Yes.
just for a chat, sometimes because it's actually business, but the connections have been easy. Actually, what's been hard is if there's a new customer, to come onto a Zoom call to meet them for the first time, to try and pitch a piece of business to them, for them to agree. Actually, you've got to create credibility, reliability, and intimacy in a half-hour Zoom call. That's actually far more challenging.
Yeah, I'd agree with that without a shadow of a doubt. I think you're absolutely right. And that's a great question just to kind of ponder. I haven't got any immediate answer to that, and I agree with you. That is super challenging.
How would you, if you were with a group of guys on a sales training program, how would you help them build intimacy virtually? Because credibility and reliability, I think that can stand by the business name.
Yeah.
But the intimacy, that's the relationship piece that you're talking about.
Yes.
How do you? Because you just mentioned before, we invite each other into our homes. You can see the pictures behind me, or the little flowers that my wife puts on the desk behind me. And I always think, oh, she's been in my office again, because there's a new set of flowers there. But building intimacy with people is different. Are there tips to build intimacy?
I mean, virtually very hard to build tips in terms of intimacy. I think it's a little bit like trying to hug somebody where they're not sure if they want to be hugged.
Right. Don't go in unless you're sure.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go in unless you're sure. Exactly. I mean, I think it's interesting. I was just thinking there about my usage on LinkedIn, and I've been thinking about posts that I've been responding to recently. And a lot of the posts which I've kind of liked or responded to recently definitely contain, or people convey, that human element of their life and their work. And I just kind of, that has appealed to me. So I don't know if it's like having multiple contact points rather than just relying on sort of having some kind of face-to-face interaction, which is connecting through that platform, posting things which are directed and more targeted to an individual, people whom you're trying to reach out to. I connected with somebody. They had this fantastic picture of a beach. I can't remember where it was, but it was just a really beautiful picture of a beach. And I just I looked at it and kind of went, wow, what an uplifting shot. So I liked it off that basis. And then this person, I wasn't connected with them. This person sent me an invitation to connect. So I don't know whether, I mean, people talk about transparency and openness. So I don't know whether kind of, instead of just talking about the business bit, which is hard to just build intimacy from, whether there's that aspect or some kind of different platform which could be looked at. But it's hard. If I don't know you at all, building intimacy when I can't kind of physically connect with you is a challenging thing.
Yeah, and I think what I've experienced in trying to build intimacy is to try and leverage that warmth in my communication style,
Yeah.
to be as authentic as possible. So I'm not standing on ceremony. I acknowledge the challenge of trying to build intimacy. It's the first time we've met. Trying to make sure that my questions are about them so they feel as though I'm genuinely interested. I guess it's part of the empathy, which is why I referenced before, you know, we're all empathic with each other at the moment. We've all going through it. And I think for people who might be listening, where it's how do we create intimacy? For me, that's how we do it. We build that intimacy through having empathy. So when you see that beach, it makes you feel like this person's connected with you because they've put something out there where you feel strongly about something like they do. You see a picture, you see an image. And I think I'm looking on LinkedIn and I'm thinking these days, God, it's pretty busy on there.
Yes, it is. There's also self-disclosure, which I think links to your point and plays to your point around being authentic. I notice I tend to read those more when people are saying, you know, this is what I'm finding, I'm struggling with this, or this is, you know, there's been an announcement. You know, even if people like there's a lady whose post I shared, I didn't know them, but I got that. I just looked at their post and went, this person needs some help. So I shared their post. I don't know whether anything came of it or not, but I just think in terms of authenticity, openness, being human, being transparent, having empathy, all of those things seem to, I think, create or help create some semblance of intimacy in the absence of being able to create it in a traditional way.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, I connected with a fellow coach because of something that they posted where they shared extraordinary vulnerability, actually, in my opinion, online, publicly. And I felt compelled to message them and say, hey, I've read your post. If you want an objective ear who works in your world, message me. And they did. And we were on the phone for a Zoom call for about 2 hours, and stay in touch via text. We send pictures of, they have cats and hedgehogs and chickens.
Wow.
And they're a brilliant coach, actually, by the way. And I sent pictures of, you know, the dogs and Sonny, who's now starting to make a noise because he wants to get out of the office. But I think you've summarized it there, actually. You did that really well because you kind of, I just wrote down 3 things when you were talking there. You said empathy, self-disclosure, and authenticity. And with those 3 things, you create the best level of intimacy possible in a virtual world. And it's almost replicating how we do it face to face, but doing it through the mediums that we have, whether it's social media, whether it's face to face, like we are here.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting because we started off our talk today thinking about, you know, how do we transition back into the office and what are we coaching leaders on? And we've kind of moved to a point where it's actually, if we are working in this virtual space now and it's part of our future, which it undoubtedly is, it's about creating that level of intimacy so that we can keep doing business both with existing and with new people.
Yes. Maybe some of those things that you just played back to me, maybe some of those things also play into how do you lead with people to make that transition and work with them in that way, new way.
I think that's podcast episode 3, isn't it?
Maybe it is.
I think what you've done there is you've pitched our 3rd installment. Will you come back and talk about how do people lead with intimacy?
Yes, I will do. I'd love to come back. It's always great talking with you, and I always enjoy it. The time flies. So look, thank you very much indeed for inviting me in once again.
No, William, leadership and training consultancy, I love it. Like you, I echo your words. It was absolutely good fun. And we'll do it again next month.
Superb. All right, go well. Stay safe,
Bye.
my friend.
Bye.
Bye.